can you talk about the life review, Jurgen? Did you ever have a life review, or where is it that people have life reviews?
Yeah, that's a very interesting thing. I personally haven't had a life review when I'm out of my body. I did have experiences of the whole panorama of my life, which also includes all my previous lives. And that's another thing. The life review of the way I see it is basically an information package of the whole life. It's not that it takes place very quickly in a sequential order. It's just more like you see your life in front of you, and it's not in a sequential order. You have got access to all the aspects of your life almost in an instant, and that's how I think it takes place. It's the only way I can relate to it, because that's how I experienced my past lives. When I get into a state of consciousness, it's all there. It's all laid out in front of me. And what happens is that, again, I try to create a picture. If you imagine there's a 3-dimensional spider's web, which has got millions of center points, a bit like brain cells. There's cells, and each brain cell is connected to another brain cell. It's a bit like that, but it's like a cosmic web, which is 3 or even 4-dimensional. But instead of seeing it in detail, you see it as a whole thing. And when you see it as a whole thing, you are aware of everything. You are aware simultaneously of each and every life you have lived, or each and every part you have played, whether it's this life or another life. And then something interesting happens. The moment you focus in on any particular junction, let's call it junction, the life you focus in on becomes 3-dimensional. You're actually entering that life, and it feels as real as your current life here on the physical level. There's no difference. It is here now reality, but it's experienced just as you did experience in your past life. Although at the same time you are aware that you're the observer. For example, I'm aware that I'm sitting in meditation at the time where this sort of thing rolls up. Then I can withdraw from it, and I can pick up another focus point, and that becomes a completely here and now reality. So once you're in this state of consciousness, all the information you have experienced as an individual consciousness is at your disposal. So you can have an overview of it. Now, it doesn't stop there, because also what it allows you to do, the moment you enter into the awareness of your unity consciousness, not only do you have access to your individual related aspects of your consciousness, but also to the whole universal consciousness. So theoretically, I haven't actually followed it through, but I knew that there is a possibility, or there's a potential which you can explore. You can enter into any information in the whole universe. You can enter into it, and you make it a here and now experience. And that's what very often is referred to as the Akashic records. So you could, for example, focus on a timeline, let's say, where the dinosaurs were extinguished. So theoretically, you can actually witness what happened at the time when the meteor struck and wiped out the dinosaurs. So all the information are available in the cosmic database, and you can, once you're in this in this higher state of consciousness, you can literally access any data point you want to access. This has got incredible repercussions, because in my book, Multidimensional Man, I found how this consciousness, how this data set actually activates experiences on the astral level. You know, for example, what happens, for example, people often wonder, how does this work when you're on the astral plane? How can I manifest things? How can I suddenly, if I think of a cup of tea, how can I suddenly have a cup of tea and drink it? And it's such a natural and spontaneous process that once people live there, they don't even have to think about much about it, because they just simply accept it, because it feels as natural as us going out to work or walking or going to the baker and buying some bread. And what actually happens, our expectation manifests objects from the database almost instantly. You know, so it's no big deal for us when we're on the astral level. I mean, that's basically the way sort of consciousness works, you know. And in my book, Multidimensional Man, in the appendix, I described how we access the data and what sort of kind of psychological energies we use to manifest things. The interesting thing was when I met people, like I described in Business of Infinity, I met people and I asked her, there was a family and the woman sort of commented on my trousers, and as we were talking, she made me a matching jacket to my trousers. And that was really interesting, because I then asked her, how do you do that? How do you do it so quickly? How do you manage that? And she said, it's very natural. And I said, can I do it? And I tried to make a cup of tea. But the moment I started thinking about it, I made a total balls up, because the teacup was looked horrible, and the tea which I sort of imagined to be in there was like water, you know. So the moment you bring your mind into it, your thoughts, you lose the connection to the data set, which is actually already there. And in order to activate it, you just have to expect it. Relationship to it. And in my book, Multidimensional Man, I listed about 5 different types of energy, how we can manifest things on the astral plane. Well, the thing is, the first thing I would say, the difference is when you are underwater on the astral plane, it doesn't feel like being underwater, because first of all, you don't drown, you can breathe, you know. And the thing is, it actually is another way of exploring things, and it's actually very pleasurable. You very quickly take a liking to the element of the water, because water on the astral plane has also its particular kind of energy, you know. So you feel there's a difference between being underwater and being out of the water. And that applies to a lot of things when we're on the astral level, that the things we encounter are not just apparitions of thoughts, but they are also energies, you know. So for example, if we go to if we dive into a river, we would feel refreshed, we would feel the energy of the river, you know. Or if we went through a garden on the astral plane and there was a fruit tree and we would pick a plum and eat it, we would actually absorb the energy and we would feel re-energized and things like that. Much more so than we would here on Earth. You know, it's much more immediate, much more original. You know, it is almost as if our senses on this physical level are sort of dulled down. You know, we are living in a world which is like looking through frosted glass. You know, our senses on this level here, on the physical level, are sort of dulled down. You know, we don't see clearly, we don't hear clearly. When we get on the astral level, our senses sort of perk up, and they become alert, and we can see things much sharper. We can hear sounds which we were totally unable to hear before on the physical level. And the same applies to color. We see a much greater range of colors there, you know. And that also is an indication that that is a more primary state than our physical level, you know. And that's why you get, going back to near-death experience, when people come back from a near-death experience, they always say, or very often they say, I went home. You know, I want to go home again. They feel like exiles. They feel they don't belong here, and they can't wait to go back home. And that's very much the case.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The next question: in our multiverse existence, is evil and misery endemic and will always be with us, or spiritual evolution eventually eliminates those subconscious evil tendencies that many use as a part of our human identity?
Yeah, big question. Well, first of all, I would say evil is basically ignorance. You know, evil is a lack of awareness of the higher qualities of spiritual life, you know, which are basically love. You know, the highest quality, the first quality of manifestation is love. Everything that sort of spreads out from there is less awareness, less connection to this love energy, which is a primal force of the universe. The less we are aware of this primal energy, the more, the darker, you know, the environment becomes, and the more ignorance we have of this energy, the more we are prone to make mistakes, the more we are prone to act out of harmony with things, and the more we sort of seek trying to find our identity. And because we lose the connection to our higher self, we blindly grope around to find something we can pin our identity on. And very often this identity we create is dictated by our senses or our experience of gratification, you know. So we gradually build our identity around that, rather than building our identity around the primary feeling of love. So that has, of course, hundreds and thousands of shades. And the more we lose our path, our connection to our core identity, the more we are out in the, you know, in ignorance, or, you know, we don't have any connection, and we then grope for things which we feel comfortable with, and we build our identity around that. And then very often, the further we go, we move away from this love principle, the more selfishly we, you know, grab our identity, try to establish an identity around it until we become totally selfish, and pull things towards us. Instead, in the absence of our true identity, we seek eternal things, external things, to build an identity in an external world. And that's how we sort of begin to lose our way. And that's why we live in a world like we do here, which is a very materialistic world, and we lose the connection to our core self. Now, evil is basically a state of ignorance. You know, that's all it is. And people very often when they encounter people who are in these low states of mind, very often people from a higher state, they feel intense sorrow for these people. But the people who are in these lower dimensional states, they can't see what the goodwill they're trying to, they just want to maintain their ignorance because that's what they know,
Jurgen, in your book, you do talk about progress from the lower levels. I remember one of the stories you told me about one of the waiters in one of the restaurants was being trained. Can you talk about what avenues of progress there are for people, or how do they progress?
Yes, basically what is needed, people can spend an awful long time in these lower dimensional levels. It is almost like they're trying to explore all the gratification they can possibly have related to their negative states of mind, which very often binds them or keeps them imprisoned in this state until they reach a point of there's a cul-de-sac. They can't go any further. They get bored, or they find it dissatisfying. There are people, they live in a community of equally minded people, and they eventually get on their nerves, and they get tired of it, and they get fed up. And then they say things like, if only I could get out of here. And the moment they say that, they're opening something up. And it's almost like a beacon when you're on the lower dimensional levels, where everything is pretty dark. When they open themselves up, it's almost as if a little bit of light sort of escapes. They say, oh, I want to get out of here. It's a feeling of surrender, a feeling of need. And these lights that sort of spark out, they're sort of picked up on by helpers, So they're like beacons, and they can quickly home in on these beacons, and then they find a point where they can connect to the person who wants to be helped. Because they can only get out of this state of consciousness if they actually want to get out. If they don't want to, if they haven't reached that stage, they can be there for hundreds of years, and until they have lived all the possibilities out and have explored all the sort of dark corners of their selfishness. But then comes a point, and I've met people. I met a woman there once. She walked around, and I asked her, how do you feel here? And it was not a very negative place. It was very much like our physical earth, but it wasn't as interesting. There was not so much going on. And I said, how do you feel? And she said, I'm getting really bored. I don't like it here. I want to get out of it. And then in my book, I said, okay, let's get out of it. And I tried to lead her into a house, because in the early days, I used metaphors to get out of the lower dimensional levels until I became more experienced, learning how to transcend different dimensions. At that stage, at the early stages, I used metaphors. And the metaphor was, I climb up a stair, or I go into a house and go to the top floor. And as I break out of the ceiling, I'm on a higher level. That was a belief I had. That was a metaphor, and very often it worked. So I took this woman up a staircase in the house, and I sort of explained to her that we can now get onto a higher level, which worked. And when we broke through the ceiling of this house, we found ourselves in a more beautiful landscape, because the metaphor which I used activated a feeling of expectation, a joyful feeling. And that joyful feeling was actually enough to catapult this person in a completely new environment. Once she was in this environment, the element of joy started to take hold of her, and it actually expanded her experience until she was established on this new type of environment and felt comfortable there. Since then, of course, I learned there are different ways of achieving it. And astral projectors, they have various ways of changing their environment. One person told me very early on the best way to change your environment is by spinning around, by turning around in a circle, like a dance. And then when you look back, you're in a different environment. And it's basically disrupting the thought flow, which kept you anchored there. And that can break the vibration, and you're on a different level. The other way you can do to transcend to a higher level is to use a mantra, which was my preferred method. I always use the mantra, the Om mantra, which is very, very powerful in itself. So very often when I got onto a dimensional level which was very drab and which wasn't very exciting, I used the Om mantra. And very often that, because I wasn't primarily interested in out-of-body experiences, a lot of the experience I had came about as a result of my meditation. So very often when I had an out-of-body experience and I chanted the Om mantra, I went straight back into meditation, which takes you to a much deeper level and a much finer level of consciousness.